Welcome to Identity, a TamilCulture.com podcast. I'm your host, Jeevan Ravindran, and I'm a journalist, presenter, and actress based in London. Now, so much of my life so far has been based on the question of identity and how we spend our lives seeking answers to who we are. In this podcast, each episode will spotlight a different creative, some from the Tamil community and some from outside it. We'll be chatting about how we grapple with our identities and take ownership of our narratives, whether it's through art, politics, literature, or activism. Our hope is to inspire your journey through their insights on identity. Hi, thank you so much, Anuk, for joining us on the Identity podcast. I'm super excited to have you. I've just been talking about how to not be starstruck by you. So I'm really excited that you're joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself for the listeners?
Hi, Jeevan. I'm really excited to talk to you too. Um, my name is Anuk Arudpragasam. I grew up in Colombo, and I guess I've been living in a few different places in the last few years. But I'm a writer, a novelist, and I guess my suspicion is that we'll be talking about that mainly.
Yes, you're right. You're right. So I guess first of all, to start with, I want to get an idea of how did you first get into writing? How did you decide it was something for you? Because through reading your books, I have this impression that you had all these thoughts and you decided that a novel was the best way to put them into, rather than that you decided to write a novel and then you filled it with these thoughts. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. I think that's true because yeah, it's funny. We didn't really grow up in I didn't grow up in a family in which, like with many books around or anything like that. And so I didn't really read much fiction when I was younger. Although, my parents were always, they always told me if I could spend money on one thing, it would be to buy books. Um, and, I don't know, when I was young, because we grew up in Colombo, because of the war, I suppose my mother was, I think it's also kind of part of Jaffna culture, a certain kind of parental suspicion of friendships, of going out, of so on and so forth. But I think in the war context in Colombo, because I was a 15 or 16-year-old boy, I wasn't really, I went to school and I came back, or I went somewhere and I came back. My movements were very confined, and so I spent a lot of time actually at home, wishing I could move around, wishing I could be away. And so I think, and so I began reading a lot, not actually fiction, but philosophy, actually, just because I don't know, it made me feel free. It made me feel that I could move. I was not limited by space and time. So I started reading a lot of philosophy, and I was lucky to get to study in the US. So I only studied in Tamil medium for 2 years when I was very young, and I switched quite early, I think around the age of 9 or 10, to English. And I was lucky to get to go to the US to study when I was 18 at university. And when I was in America, I guess I guess I began to feel I felt very alienated from that place, and I needed a way to, I guess, bring myself closer to home. And so that was really what made me start writing. But as you say, like, I guess in my writing, it's really kinds of moods and thoughts that are like most important to me, not so much a story or I don't know, necessarily characters. I mean, these things are all part of writing, but you're right that the emphasis is really on thoughts and thinking and moods and reflections.
So you were talking about this distance that you felt, like that you were trying to, use writing to write your way home, I guess. Um, and was that to do with being away while the end of the Civil War was happening as well? How did that affect your writing?
When I started to write, I didn't really. I think the very first story I wrote was about. I started by writing short stories, and the very first story I wrote was about the news of Prabhakaran's death. Just the news, like how it was received by in Tamil homes in the south. Um, but it wasn't really necessarily like in my mind that I needed to always write about, say, Tamils or Tamil characters and things like that. That happened a little bit later, like early on into writing, but that happened in 2009 and 2010 when I was really becoming aware of the, I guess, of the extent of violence in the Northeast perpetrated by the army. When I became aware of the genocide, really, and I began to lose myself uh, in all the images and videos that started coming out. That was really when I became, I guess, it was, I guess, it was an event that politicized uh, uh, almost all Tamils in our generation. And so I was no exception. And really, that was the time when I had been writing and I had thought a little, I mean, I'd written a little bit about, I guess, Tamil life or like my experiences in a Tamil life. But this was the time where I really, my writing became like kind of inseparable from this genocide.
And a huge part of that was like the distance you felt from it, right? Like you mentioned this in previous interviews. I think you felt guilty about like not having to experience it firsthand or not having lived through the impacts of it. And I think that's something that everybody, especially in the diaspora, all the Tamils in the diaspora, definitely feel. I felt it too.
Yeah, yeah.
And I felt like
Actually,
you encapsulated that so well in A Passage North, like when Krishan is looking back through
yeah,
this archival material, and it's like a form of self-punishment almost.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was, I mean, I didn't state it explicitly in the novel, but really, A Passage North views Colombo Tamils also as part of the diaspora. Um, and and I didn't think of it really at the time. This was something that struck me maybe has I've begun to realize in the last year or two. But I really kind of changed how I understand the idea of diaspora. I think historically the word diaspora, I mean, it's in English it comes from reference to the expulsion of Jews from wherever, Palestine, but and now we use it in general to refer to any group of people that has been displaced from their homeland. So the idea of diaspora is very closely tied to land. Um, and I think for me, I just have started to understand diaspora in terms of less in terms of land and more in terms of experience. For me, actually, the experience of the event of the genocide, in a way, it's so constitutive of Tamil identity. It's so central to how we now understand ourselves that for me, diaspora are the people who simply weren't there at the site of the genocide. It's relationship to a historical moment or historical experience that for me constitutes uh, who lives inside Tamilness, because Tamilness in a way is so tied to that event now, and who lives outside of it, and who has, and so more than I guess I don't know the actual number, but close to half of Tamils from the Northeast no longer live there, and so this experience of diaspora is so it's half of our it's half of our community. It's really so it was also, and also, yeah, because I grew up in Colombo, and I, because of the war, was never able. I visited my hometown which is close to Point Pedro, for the first time when I was 21, or 20 or 21. So I had a totally diasporic relationship also, and with all the attendant guilt, and all the attendant, all of the, watching from afar.
But I'm sure that there are some Colombo Tamils who would push back against what you've said and would say it's not fair to describe Colombo Tamils as diaspora because, like you mentioned, your movements were constricted during the war, and
Yeah.
1983 impacted Colombo so heavily. What
Yeah,
would be
yeah.
your response to that?
No, it's true. It's true. And I've noticed that, for example, there are certain kinds of, say, in interpersonal situations, with uh, with uh, with prejudiced Sinhalese people, for example, if such an event comes up, I find that I get a lot more filled with rage, and I become a lot more aggressive in response to this than a lot of, say, friends I have from the Northeast. And that's because I've had to deal with it my whole life. Whereas they, for example, that's an element of, they deal with the military and the police and the bombs, whereas we have had to deal with a society and individuals, and also the ambivalence of friendships and relationships, with this community. So there's also a certain kind of intimacy and a certain kind of proximity uh, to the Sinhalese community, but there's also, because of that, there's also like much more scope for anger and much more scope for rage. So yeah, I agree. I don't think, I wouldn't say that. But then, but then the diaspora abroad has its own challenges. So it's not. Yeah, I don't want to diminish anybody challenges anybody has faced, but I tend to diminish my own, and so it may seem like I'm diminishing all of. I also grew up in an upper middle class home, and so I was shielded in some ways from if you have a car, as opposed to being reliant on a bus, for example, every day. That's one way in which you are shielded from all sorts of aggressions and unpleasant interactions, right? So part of this is just also, it was part of my class experience.
And you've lived in quite a few different places over the last few
Mm-hmm.
years, as you mentioned, a few of which have been in Western societies in, Paris and
Mm-hmm.
Germany, and then in New York as well. How have you found yourself relating to Tamil communities there, and how has your experience of diaspora changed accordingly?
Well, I lived with my mother and my sister for 2 years when I was young, in Australia, in Sydney. And we moved back to Sri Lanka because that was to Colombo, because that was where my father was working. But I would say about 90% of my family lives outside Sri Lanka. We have only one close family in Colombo. We have a few in Jaffna, but I would say really the majority lives in London. There's one family in Germany. There's a few in Australia. There's a few in Tamil Nadu. So, and I've always been like in interaction, and also the fact that I studied in English made it easier for me to like also like so be in touch with the diaspora. Really, it was kind of interesting for me to go to France, because to spend a year in France. I spent, the time I spent in America was really the most homesick I felt, because I feel like a lot of Tamil people I meet or I've encountered there like seem fairly like deracinated, fairly like kind of removed from their history. So it didn't really feel like I was encountering, someone I could identify with closely. That's not the case in England, but it was very different for me to go and spend time in France. And also, each diaspora has its own challenges, but I was really struck by the way in which, in French society, really, it's very difficult to enter into the middle class, as a non-white person, and specifically as a non-white person who doesn't speak their language. And so, I mean, I was also kind of uh, experienced life in some ways, just in terms of your treatment by your neighbors or police or like immigration officials or something, with like a lot of suspicion. And so this was kind of striking to me, just the kind of total what I felt was like a lack of like an inability to assimilate into middle class society, that I was not there, for example, in the UK or Canada. But yeah, and sort of, yeah, I don't know, it was interesting in a lot of ways.
I lived in Paris for a year as well.
Did you have that experience?
Yeah, and I think just like the way that Tamil community like bands together there is like, I don't, it feels different to
It does feel different, yeah. It really does, yeah. And it was also, it was so nice to just be in the metro and then just see Tamil people, and just know that, like, I can't speak to any of these the French people around me, but just to know, I mean, one day I didn't, if I would, my first week in Paris, one day my phone didn't have connection, and so I had to get from where I was staying, from like La Chapelle to where I was living, which was, maybe a half an hour or 45-minute walk. And I didn't have a map, so I literally just stopped at every Leica mobile shop to see whether there was a Tamil owner. And this was how I asked for directions at every every Tamil run Leica mobile shop until I got home. And this is just so nice.
I love that. Yeah, I used to make like weekly, it was like a pilgrimage, like weekly trips to La Chapelle and just like stock up on all my snacks. Because
Yes, right, exactly.
um so in terms of the emotions that go into your writing, um especially with A Passage North, it feels like Krishan is very similar to you as a person. Is that true? And like, where do you draw the line between yourself and like what you're putting into like your protagonists?
Hmm. Well, I tried to make Krishan sympathetic. So at the most basic level, no flaws of mine would enter a character, like the character. I would avoid that. Um, I would say he's similar to me in the fact that of his bilingualism.
Mm.
He's similar in terms of his education and his class status. He is similar to me in the fact that he has both spent time in the Northeast and in India. And he's similar to me in that that he's also experienced, or the guilt, the emotion of this feeling of guilt, and this condition of spectatorship is has shaped him kind of profoundly in relationship to his the Tamil community. But yeah, the novel is fictional, and I don't really like, I don't know, I'm kind of a private person, so I don't really like, and I don't think I would write nonfiction, really, not in English at least, maybe in Tamil. But I don't like this idea of being exposed to strangers. I mean, writing is intimate, and one is also vulnerable in various ways, and so one needs to know who one is being vulnerable to. If one writes in English, then every Tom, Dick, and Harry will be able to read what you write. If I was writing in Tamil, for example, I would have a much stronger sense of who would be reading, and therefore I would be able to choose what to conceal and what to reveal more strategically, because I have a more intimate connection to my audience. And that's kind of why I write fiction and not nonfiction in English. And so because of this distance and this ambiguity, I can write about myself, or about experiences that I had, or experiences that are important to people or close to me, without revealing myself, like as if I am still a secret in some way, which is important to me.
And so how would it be different if you are writing in Tamil? Like, who is the audience when you're writing in English, and what would it be if you were writing in Tamil?
It's for me, well, I should say this will change as my relationship to Tamil changes. Also, I mean, to Tamil literature, because I really only have been reading in Tamil, like literature for the last, 5-10 years. Like I said, I didn't study, so I feel I have a whole amount of. There's a certain respect one has to have with respect to, like such a tradition as, the Tamil, and so one doesn't want to write and publish unless one feels one can give the language this respect in writing. So it's not that. So I also avoid publishing. I've published one or two things, but for that reason in Tamil. And I'm sure. So also once if I start publishing, which I don't know that I will actually, because I really like the sense that I have a secret language to write in, something that's not accessible to other people. If I did write in Tamil, I certainly wouldn't translate it into English, because then I would lose the intimacy that I feel when I do write in Tamil. But it really depends on where I am. I notice that when I'm at home, when I'm visiting my parents in Colombo, I actually enjoy writing in English more than in Tamil, because it helps me leave my house. But I would really enjoy writing a lot in Tamil over the time I lived in the US, because it helped me leave America. So there was this kind of like, there's this kind of dynamic relationship depending on where I am and where I want to be and where I want to escape to. But I think, Tamil is the language of the home, of being I mean, this is one way in which Colombo Tamils are, somewhat similar to the diaspora Tamils, because a lot of Colombo Tamils aren't really Tamil is a language for the home, because one is always frightened, or during the war one was frightened to speak outside. One was told keep one's voice down or just not speak. Don't speak Tamil. Don't let anybody know that you're Tamil. And in this sense, I mean, in the diaspora, it was obviously Tamil is unintelligible to outsiders. So the language and its significance is restricted to the domestic space. What does that mean? It's not a language in which, for me and a lot of Tamils who grew up in these specific kinds of conditions, who don't go, for example, to university in Tamil, we don't talk about economics in Tamil. We don't talk about Marxism in Tamil. We don't talk about a lot of things in Tamil. It's not that the language is not there, but certain groups of us haven't had access to this particular these particular discourses in Tamil. So then Tamil becomes much more limited to the domestic sphere. What does that mean? It's the language of mothers and fathers shouting at each other, fighting with each other, shouting at their children, showing love, offering food, giving advice. There's a certain directness in how we speak, and a certain kind of frankness in how a language is used within the home, right? It's a language for also emotion, language in public discourse is often drained of a certain kind of emotion. But if the language is only like its primary location is the domestic sphere, it has all of these, like this very direct and this very practical and this very concrete and this very kind of visceral, like bodily feeling, because it's the language you use with your siblings and your parents. And so for me, it feels a lot, for that reason, it just feels a lot more intimate, because it's not a language I'm used to speaking to strangers in. So, and again, yeah, so that's why I would feel like that kind of directness and intimacy would be there when I write in Tamil. And so for me, for example, if that's something I want to write about, then Tamil would be the language for me to do that.
And is there a way of conveying that intimacy in English, or do you feel that it's lost or incomparable?
It's interesting because, mean, one cannot convey. I'm in the position of now writing in English about Tamil speaking people. And although now I'm writing a novel set in the diaspora, and so this is the first time I'm really focusing on Tamils who are speaking, not necessarily always Tamil, but it's difficult to like make a generalization about it. But wait, actually, would you remind me the specific question you asked?
Yeah, I said, is there a way of conveying that intimacy in English, or do you feel like
right? Yeah. So I'm in the position of writing now about Tamil speaking people, but I'm writing about their conversations in English. What I've done, say with the Passage North, is simply not have the dialogue. That felt more appropriate to me because it's really, I mean, I think it is quite ridiculous to try to convey Tamil speech in English, because aside from just the obvious fiction of it, the obvious the fact that there's I'm presenting something as something it's not. There's also the fact that like you cannot convey there's so much, people's Tamil obviously varies so much depending on regionality, on caste, on education, and everything gets flattened in English. If you put that in English, if you want to convey differences in region or differences in dialect or class or caste in English, one uses the standard dialects available in English, right? African American English, Southern American English, different kinds of English in the United Kingdom. But these you cannot use these you cannot use the English of, a working class English person from Liverpool to talk about, to convey the English of a factory worker from Watukote. You can't, or a fisherman. You can't. It sounds ridiculous. And so the issue is then all of these variations become flattened. And then you have this sense of like, whereas so much of what we learn about another person, a Tamil person, in communication with them, we learn from how they speak, right? We immediately get a sense of where they're from, where they've, how much they've studied, all of these things, right? So so then I've just avoided dialogue till now. I mean, it's interesting because we tend to think of Tamil as, we tend to have insecurities about Tamil. I'm saying those of us who are educated in English, precisely because Tamil for us, because of our social situations, is restricted to the domestic sphere, we feel that Tamil is kind of a language for uneducated people. It's false and it's ugly to feel, but a lot of people, including myself, have at some point in their childhood felt some kind of shame around speaking this language, and later on, when they begin to study in another language, begin to ask themselves, why don't we have these discourses in Tamil? Generally, the discourses are there; they just are not accessible to us if we are outside certain, places. But there is some truth to this idea that like a language is not just the set of words you have for naming things and labeling things. We should not think that a language is insufficient or inadequate because there are certain phenomena for which it lacks words. It might, in fact, be the case that the language and the culture has intentionally or purposefully in some way avoided giving words to certain subjects. I think, for example, in terms of, in Tamil, it's easy to say I love you to a lover, and a little bit tricky to say to a parent or a child. In Tamil, there's really no ordinary casual way of saying good morning, good night, things like this, right? We interpret this scarcity of words as a defect of the language. But really, a lot of these things that are in English or in European languages articulated very explicitly, we rely on the body to convey, right? We there's a certain way we have of letting the other person know that we're going to sleep. Sometimes you might say things like, okay, I'm going to sleep. And then you might think that's not quite as intimate or sweet as saying good night. It doesn't have this kindness or this generosity to it. In the same way, why can't I say I love you to my mother? Why can't I say that clearly or directly? Why do I have to always at the end of a Tamil conversation add I love you in English? And does that mean this language is cold or that there's no intimacy in it? No, it's rather that the language has, or the culture has, decided that there are certain things that we shall communicate to each other with our bodies, in our manner, right, in our tone of voice or in the tilt of our head. The idea that having more words is a positive thing, that it's a fault of a language not to have all the words for all the subjects, it's a very false. I mean, it's a very English-centric idea also, because English is a language that is continuously finding words for things. So I actually think I can describe people's bodies in English. I can describe the movement of, I mean, it's funny. There are certain, actually, to move your head from side to side, there's no good word in English. Nod is a up and down motion. There's no way to capture all of the variation of head movements in English. But if I want to, I can. It'll take a little bit longer, but I can describe the body, the movement of the body, the relationship, the space between the physical bodies. I can do all this in English, but I can capture a Tamil way of being. So in this sense, I feel like I can articulate certain things. There are certain things you can, and there are certain things you can't.
I love that.
Just as I know there's.
Sorry, go on.
No, I'm done.
No, I was going to say I love that point about like, there are certain things that we express in our bodies or our tones or the way we speak, and it also makes me wonder, like, is it maybe because certain things are just taken to be evident or taken to be truths? Like, you don't say I love you to a mother because it's assumed.
Yeah.
And in English, we're always needing to say things
Yes. Yes.
to prove that they are true, and they're not true unless they are said.
Yeah.
And there's that difference as well between like a love that always exists and a love that's acquired, right? A love for a lover is acquired, whereas a love between a mother and child, it just starts existing like that. I wonder whether that's part of it too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. No, that's a very good point. I never even thought of it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's also a different relationship to silence, right? I mean, Anglo-Saxons are uncomfortable with silences. But that's also because I feel that they don't really have a wide gesture of vocabulary. And so silence means the end of communication for them. For us, it's simply, I mean, I'm speaking in black and white, so it's really not the case that it's black and white, and these are differences in emphasis, really. But yeah, for us, silence doesn't mean the end of communication.
So when people read your books, like, what are you hoping that they take away anything from them? Like, I'll just tell you how I reacted to the books. I cried for both of them. But A Story of a Brief Marriage, I think, to me it felt so raw, and I guess, like, given the distance as well that I have experienced from the conflict, and not being directly affected by it in any way myself, I think it's like you said, the power of fiction is that it bridges that distance, even though we don't have the personal experience to account for it. And I think, yeah, it was so raw in all of the details that you described, and the way it played out, and the setting, but also, like you've mentioned, I think intentionally not contextualizing it and politicizing it, but just like allowing that present moment to unfold. But then A
Yeah.
Passage North, to me, like, I think both were like heavy reads in different ways, you know, like The Story of a Brief Marriage was heavy because of the subject matter and, you know, how laboriously each detail unfolded. And then A Passage North was just like living inside someone's mind. Um, and I think there were certain points that just popped out to me, like, you know, the bit where Krishan is thinking about the Buddha and how he sees all these people and they're like having great time, and then there's like a funeral and he's like, these people are crazy, like why are they like living their best life when they know that death is just around the corner. And I think, yeah, I've had that thought so many times, and
Yeah.
I've never seen it like captured that way in a novel, that philosophical thought. So yeah, I want to understand, like, what do you feel you hope that audiences will take from your books, and what reactions have people told you that they've had?
I mean, I mean, it's very nice to hear that. I mean, and I'm always, it's, I don't generally think of an audience. My sister is really the person I share most of my work with first. And I would say the audience that I care about is is Tamil people who would read my work in 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 English. Um, so I'm always moved and like touched if it has resonated or moved somebody. Because also, like I said, most of my family is diaspora. Um, I can't say that I write with like with this goal in mind. I write with the faith that like who I am, the forces that have shaped me are also forces that have shaped other people. And when I look into myself, I'm also therefore looking into other people. Um, and that if I look into myself uh, like humbly and ruthlessly enough, then there will be also something there for other people who haven't had, like say the time or the been given the education to do that uh, in the particular way that I'm doing it. I yeah, in a way, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, there's no also fiction, and writing English language fiction, it's one is just also very much aware of the, I guess, politically speaking, the uselessness of such a gesture, when one is dealing with say a genocide in which people have already died, in which the bereaved will continue to suffer, whether or not a book is written in a language they cannot read. It's nothing in me. It's I mean, I know certain people would, even if they cannot read English, would be proud to hear that or happy or whatever to hear that such a story has received some attention. But me personally, if one succeeds or if one grows as a literary novelist, what that means is that increasing numbers of bourgeois people from England, America, Canada, and the Western world in general read one's books. By definition, the bourgeois is a class, the middle class is a class that is invested in the status quo, that delegates political consciousness to film, to social media, to literature, and so I'm very aware that, like, for the audience that I happen to write for, as a rap person who is writing in English, my work really can't have that much political significance. So for that reason, I view it as like it's something I do for myself, and if it's helpful or enriching uh, for other people, then I'm glad. I'm also glad because it allows me to keep writing, and it's something that I love to do. but there's no real like political hope for me in my writing.
I mean, you have this incredible self-awareness of like where you stand as a novelist, and what your work is doing. I mean, like you said, it's written in a language that a lot of people who are directly affected by this can't read. So is there any part of you that wants to, find a way to make this accessible to working class Tamil people, or to reach those audiences who are excluded from this bourgeois group?
I don't know. For example, if that was my role, I could do it a lot better, for example, as a teacher. If that was my goal, I could do it a lot better as a teacher than as a novelist.
Yeah.
Even in Tamil, you look at who reads in Tamil. In northern Sri Lanka, go to the bookshops. There are very few bookshops. They most of the books they order, if you're buying books through those bookshops, you go to the bookseller and you ask for the book, and they will order it for you. The book is not sitting on the shelf because there's no standing audience for this kind of thing. Literature reading, and as we know, access to literature and writing in our society is highly shaped by caste. It is an activity that one needs a certain kind of leisure for, which again is very closely tied to class and caste experience. So I could write in Tamil, but it's not going to reach working class people. So I'm aware of that. So I'm also aware that when I write in Tamil also, it's not necessarily for because the Tamil I write would never be a Tamil of the soil. It would never be the rousing like visceral Tamil of the poetry that we've heard, the music that we hear. No, it would reflect my circumstances, which is one of distance from this northeastern culture. So in either case, I don't feel that the writing in Tamil would fulfill that either necessarily. I mean, yes, technically theoretically it would be accessible to anybody who can read and write. And we have a fairly high literacy rate in Northeast Sri Lanka, so technically it would be available. But I'm not really under any, I'm not really helping anything by writing in Tamil either. Writing is something that nobody ever asks one to write. Generally, one writes because one wants to write, or one wants to be seen as a writer, or whatever. But like, I don't see why I should try to pretend that there's some some political benefit to that. On the other hand, like I said, I do believe that I do feel like pedagogy for me would be a much more actually a much more impactful way of sharing my education with other people in our community who haven't had access to that education. So that is something I think about and wonder how I could do and how I could fit into my life. But I have not. I don't have the answer for that. I haven't figured it out.
Well, there's
for myself.
right.
Yeah.
But even though it doesn't have a political benefit, as you say, there is obviously a very tangible impact to what you're doing that goes beyond just you. Like, you've been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and I guess Sri Lankan Tamil writing breaking into the mainstream is in itself huge. Like, it's been revolutionary for me to have people actually, have someone heard of your name and your books, and I've given your book as a present to a lot of people, and they've all already heard of it, which is huge.
Yeah, that is, yeah. I mean, I was, yeah, actually, so you're right in that sense. And when I was, there's a whole huge publicity machinery in this, with these kinds of things, right? It doesn't really, actually, nobody really cares about the particular book. If there's judges are chosen, there's an input, there's a process, several books are inputted, and like 6 come out, and out of those 6, 1 comes out. There's a certain kind of algorithm that each set of judges chooses. It's like kind of, often it's garbage in, it's garbage out. But and then the system of publicity, the machinery also, it's a machinery that's going to continue regardless of what kind of book you write and who you write about. It's a system that is meant to disseminate these books, to advertise them, to make sure people know, but the system itself is totally does not care. But in that sense, yeah, it was, I mean, I did recognize that, like, I did not understand actually what it meant to, what this kind of like machinery, how it operated, and how, like, I guess books and literature also operated through it, until it happened. But yeah, so in that sense, it's good. I tried, I made a point in every interview I had to use the word genocide. And yeah, I think, I mean, I this was one thing I did feel pleased about, was that, because it's so easy for people to dismiss accusations of genocide, because the people who are making them are generally refugees who do not speak articulately in the language of their home country, or have not gone through the institutions of those countries. It's easy to dismiss them as dark-skinned, uneducated. I mean, this is what they are to the white gaze, and also some version of that to the conservative singular gaze. And I guess I did recognize that somebody who is quote unquote educated, or like someone who is quote unquote recognized by the culture industry saying these things, means it cannot be ignored, although it has been ignored, obviously. But it can't be ignored as easily.
Yeah. I mean, genocide recognition specifically is like a very much an ongoing battle, right? It's been
Yes.
ongoing for the last 13 years and has been brought before several international justice mechanisms. Is there any part of you that thinks that through greater visibility, like through your writing, for example, and the fact that you said, like, these things making it into the cultural mainstream, is there any part of you that hopes that that would have an impact in that way?
Yes. Yeah, definitely, because it's important to me. But I'm not sure. I think we will, if we do achieve genocide recognition, we will be pleased, and it will mean a lot to a lot of different people. But if genocide recognition comes, it won't come from the Sri Lankan government or the Sri Lankan people. Yeah. It will come from foreign governments, and that is also some kind of assurance or some kind of relief, and so on and so forth. But ever since the end of the war, the guiding political project of the Tamils of Northeast Sri Lanka is genocide recognition, and it's as a project, as a project to galvanize, to assemble, and to organize a community, as a project that offers a vision for the future of a society. It's a far more impoverished project than, for example, the project of a nation state. I mean, it's so clear how much more, how much smaller what we are asking for is now, and so it is a small thing. It's a small and very important thing to me, and I would be pleased, and I do hope, if I do have any work, if my work has some impact, that I hope it contributes to this. But I'm also aware that there are bigger, more encompassing, more future-oriented projects that, as a community, we need to find. And I think that is something. I mean, the Tamil community experienced the loss of meaning after 2009. It was not merely the deaths of 150,000 people or whatever number. It was not merely the psychic trauma of those who were left behind. It was also for people from the Valley and people outside the Valley also a loss of a project of meaning, a project that can justify things that people have suffered, that can justify bereavements, that can justify sacrifices, that can justify displacements. There is no longer such a project that can play this kind of this all-encompassing role of bringing a society together. And I think that's that. I think we need that, and I don't think I don't know. I have not come across articulations of what a vision like that could be. And until then, for me, like for everybody else, genocide recognition would be the most obvious political project that we can engage in. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so I take everything with a grain of salt.
Do you think that we will find a more all-encompassing vision?
I don't really know. I don't really, I'm not a, I have a lot of thoughts about these things, but I don't really have any. There's really no, I have no qualification to for what I say about these things to be taken seriously. I guess not soon, because I guess people need to still mourn the loss of the nation state project. I mean, but also, history is very long. We have been around for a long time, and we will continue to be around for a long time. And the Sri Lankan state is not very old. It's 60 or 70 years old. I mean, and there's no reason to think it will last for a long time. There's no reason to think that the island of Sri Lanka will remain above water for a long time. Actually, the novel I write now, one of the characters, he's from Toronto. He's an academic, and he's writing an essay. He's talking to the main character, who is also a woman from Toronto, and he's telling her about this about Kumari Kandam, which as you know is this I guess conjectured or imagined continent that stretched between East Africa and and it basically the Indonesia. And South India on the one hand, and Antarctic on the other hand. It was an entire landmass which was conjectured to be the home of Tamil civilization, where the first two literary sangams took place, and that was lost to water. And all the so-called, this was the original Tamil homeland, and what we now call Tamilaham or Tamil Elam are really just small extensions of that landmass that stayed above water. And so according to this myth of Tamil origin, it's the 19th century, it became very popular in the 19th century. Tamils were always diaspora. They were already displaced from a central from a piece of land. And I guess I like to think of, then in that case, I like to think of the current set of displacements and the present catastrophe of our community as actually something that is continuous with our past. And actually, so this novel, or this character in this novel, asks or hopes actually that the island of Sri Lanka submerges, and wonders, now that there is literally no piece of land that we can call our own. Land comes with its own problems. If we had our nation state, I very much fear what, I don't know. whether we would have done it properly, whether we would have been fair, and whether we would have been just. But regardless of that, what if this piece of land no longer existed? Then how do we articulate our relationship to each other, and what binds us together? Is it the language that we speak, or is it relation to this historical moment? I mean, as in the genocide. I don't know, but it's so that main character is that character in the novel is kind of, he wonders, both of them wonder about what would that do for the land, for the island to sink into the water.
And when you say what binds us together, is that like what binds Tamils together?
That's what I meant. Yeah, that's what I meant. Because something will, and it could be instructive to see what that would be.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's so much, and I think genocide recognition, like, is a huge part of it at the moment. But obviously, that's been fluid and changing through time, and will continue to change, right?
Yeah, and I think if we are committed enough about it, I think it will happen. Genocide recognition. I mean, maybe not in by the Sri Lankan government, but or maybe, I don't know. But if it happens in Sri Lanka, this is the thing. I don't know if there is if there is genocide recognition by the Sri Lankan government, I wouldn't really take it that seriously. I would say, well, it's easy. It's easy from a position of security and from a position of stability to be vulnerable enough to deal with things you've done wrong or with your guilt. Just like it's very easy for white liberals today in America and Europe to talk about slavery or to talk about what they owe minorities or what they owe refugees. But if you take away their economic and political stability, if you put them through a situation in which they are in crisis, I doubt very much that you would get the generosity that liberals in the West project now towards other communities. So even if it came, I believe it would come. I wouldn't necessarily believe that it would, that sentiment would last. It's the kind of generosity of a victor, of someone who is not threatened by anything.
So how much can you tell us about this novel that's coming up? It sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I think, no, I mentioned it as a kind of tease. No, I can't tell you anything about it. But I'm working on it. And yeah, I don't know. I hope to finish it in a year or so. But these things take, they take time, and usually it takes longer than I plan. So I don't want to hurry it because yeah, these things, they work themselves out in their own time. So much of it's time and patience. So I just have to wait and see.
And once you finish that one, people will be clamoring for the next one. So might as well just prolong the wait.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's really not, for me, it's not about a book. It's really just about a daily activity that is important to my health and well-being. That's how I see it. And books are a way of making that a viable way of living. They actually aren't, because most writers cannot make a viable living out of writing, but there seems to be a possibility in my case. So my fingers are crossed.
My fingers are crossed for you too. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time. And
No,
it
was my pleasure.
loved talking to you. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it was a really lovely conversation. It's lovely to talk to somebody who, also just, a sensitive reader, but also somebody that you don't need to explain things to, no? Or like certain things we can take for granted, and then we can move beyond establishing like the basics.
Yeah, no need for that contextual
Yeah,
paragraph
exactly.
explain.
Exactly.